Aesthetics are crazy, because for every frutiger aero, you can get an analog horror that's completely horrifying. From Frutiger Metro, which is basically Frutiger Aero's cousin, to the roar scene culture of 2007, there are a lot of aesthetics. And that's where I, Zeep, come in. Your favorite YouTuber, like, ever. By the way, get this video to 5,000 likes if you want a sequel to it, and also subscribe. From scary to whatever the hell is this, these are the most abandoned aesthetics. How can you define analog horror in only a couple of minutes? Well, here's the thing, you can't. There has been so much produced under the tagline of the analog horror aesthetic, such as with the case of the Walton Files, and my personal favorite, Local 58, that covering almost everything would require its own special video. So that's why I will cover some basic elements, and also the history of analog horror right here. And in order to understand the history of it, we have to go back. Like, way back. So get this, it's November 1987, past the 9 PM hour in Chicago, Illinois. During the middle of a sports segment on an independent TV station, there was a giant signal intrusion. The channel was hijacked by a person wearing a mask, swaying erratically back and forth with a hypnotizing background.
Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I. Actually, the computer that we have running our news from time to time took off and went wild.
Eventually, the channel was able to regain control, however a couple hours later, during a late night on PBS, an episode of Doctor Who was hijacked by the very same person wearing that mask, except for a longer period of time. The person was wearing a mask of a character named Max Headroom. Max Headroom was a satirical personality who would make fun of pop culture of the 1980s. In the hijacking, the person wearing the mask is true to the character he's mimicking. He calls a sportcaster a liberal, while holding up a can of Pepsi, he flips the middle finger, and near the end of the entire hijacking, he has his ass out, followed by it being smacked by a fly swatter.
Oh, I just made a giant masterpiece for all the greatest world newspaper nerds.
The image would then fade into static, and then the episode of Doctor Who continued. After this happened, numerous calls were made towards PBS, saying, "What the hell was that?" To which PBS was also confused. In the years following, we still do not know who was the person responsible for this hijacking. What the hijacker did was illegal, so it makes sense why the individual has not come forward. Sure, what happened wasn't really creepy, as nothing really creepy happened in the recording, unless you count his ass being out as horrifying, but I would argue this was one of the beginnings of analog horror, we just didn't know it yet. There's a feeling of uncanniness that is consistent when it comes to analog horror. Like, we shouldn't be seeing this. The Max Headroom incident wasn't something we were supposed to be seeing, we were just forced into it. Analog horror's aesthetic is consistent of old-styled footage that has a lot of static and is all glitchy. The distortion here is the fact that something is wrong in what would usually be safe in professional television. My most favorite example of analog horror would have to be Local 58. Beginning in 2017, Local 58 is a fake public access television channel that in universe began in the 1930s. Stationed in Mason County, West Virginia, the radio station has been hijacked over its 90-year run by horrifying broadcasts. Said broadcasts include the worst coming to pass, such as the downfall of the United States, being unable to destroy an unnamed enemy, and calling upon all Americans to act to preserve the memory of the United States by taking their own lives. This is to prevent the enemy from capturing Americans. A part that always gets me is when it says, "This message will repeat until there are none left to read it." Dude, it's so chilling. The broadcast even encourages Americans to tend to their children first before they do it upon themselves. Local 58 is one of the finest examples of analog horror. It has its own lore that has to do with the moon being, well, alive. It takes simple concepts such as sleeping and makes it so terrifying. In the short Real Sleep, the TV channel conducts a psychological test that messes with one's cognition by essentially brainwashing them, all under the disguise of trying to help you sleep better. Local 58's horror is very subtle, and of course, it has that classic analog horror aesthetic that we all crave when it comes to this horror genre. Something in the same vein of Local 58, however, has to do with a web series known as The Walton Files. Files. The Walton Files explains a fictional company by the name of Bunny Smiles that had a pair of tapes that had a slew of dark content having to do with kids and animatronics. Basically Five Nights at Freddy's, but if it was complete analog horror. One of the tapes is an employee training video that has this creepy bunny as the mascot for a place called Bond's Burgers. It's said to have been created at some point in 1974, adding to the nostalgic factor to it all. Bond's Burgers has multiple animatronics known as the Showstoppers. We're greeted to the founders of the restaurant, and over time we would see images of them with distorted or warped or even blackened faces, which has become synonymous with analog horror. A lot of the tropes also found here are that of found footage, being in like a basement, recording an animatronic suit being pulled apart. Sometimes you even get the occasional jump scare. Of course, you can't talk about analog horror without talking about the Mandela Catalog. A product of the Walton Files and Local 58, the Mandela Catalog came out in 2021 and immediately took the internet by storm. Set between the 1990s and 2000s, a lot of the Mandela Catalog is that of the found footage aesthetic. The Mandela Catalog references Jesus, like, a lot. How even the first short ever released is about Mary receiving the word that she's going to be the one to give birth to Jesus. However, when it comes to the face of the angel who informs Mary, their face is censored. The angel goes on to visit Joseph to say that they're the one true savior, while also stating that they're deceiving the shepherds all around them.
I will fool the shepherds. I will know their greatest fear. I will know your greatest fear. Do not be afraid, my dear shepherds. I have great news. I am your true savior. I know everything about what makes you human.
Over the course of the series, it is confirmed that this method of trying to trick others that they are the true savior actually loops around to the angel not being an actual angel, but a shapeshifter. This isn't just a theory. Look at the Mandela Catalog Volume 1, which borrows a page from Local 58 with a PSA by the official United States government stating that the United States is under the threat of an enemy that we don't understand.
If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see a person that has a biologically impossible characteristic, run away and hide.
The PSA is hijacked with the shapeshifter trying to trick you to unalive yourself. This intruder could come in multiple ways. It could use a TV to enter the homes of the victims it wishes to cause trouble. It uses religion to disguise itself, and whatever it tells its victims, it makes them go crazy, leading 97% of victims to unalive themselves. This series is well in depth, and the lore surrounding this universe is really astonishing. Analog horror was great. It really was. But it got a little tropey. You see, we've come a long way since Local 58. Being the godfather of this entire analog horror genre, many people were inspired by it. But in the years that followed Local 58, what came afterward ranged in quality. And I'm not even talking about the VHS filter. People got used to whatever analog horror would try to throw its way. There would be a pause and then followed by like some sort of VHS filter in the background. Ah, look at this, he's staring at you and he looks creepy, right? Oh, don't forget about that buzz sound effect in the background, you can't forget that. There's been a steady decline when it comes to analog horror. Let me introduce to you the concept of the smile tapes. And it's not to say that the smile tapes is bad, I would just argue that it's doing what the Mandela Catalog did, but really not as great. The YouTuber UniPulse brings up the concept of Germa syndrome. That is, remember that picture of Germa that was part of the sus meme a couple years back? Now keep in mind that smile, and try to apply that over and over again when it comes to analog horror. This has become a cliche in the genre. Creepy smile, followed by semi-creepy voice, followed by every now and then you see a jump scare. Ah, but you can't forget about that buzzing sound effect in the background. The genre just became so overplayed and repeated over and over again that people just stopped caring as much. Things weren't as scary anymore because you already know what's really coming next. An example that everyone goes after is the analog horror story Urban Spook, a show about a killer who goes around killing random victims and then painting their faces after the murder. A notorious example has to do with the third episode about two kids who met their doom who were sewn together. it explicitly describes the demise of an 11-year-old, and it's just weird. People got mad because they thought this series was trying overly hard to try to be creepy and explicit, that they were just like, okay, I guess the 11-year-old's gone, and you decided to try and make this as disgusting as possible just for shock value. Okay, thanks. The thing about analog horror is that there are attempts to try and make it fresh again, but the analog horror aesthetic usually goes under the same pitfalls that it was established upon. Yeah, I guess there's some sense of creepy lore here when it comes to a new analog horror series, but it all loops back to the same thing. VHS footage. It's creepy, right? There's some major lore here, but there's just so many of these series that to truly invest in a new analog horror series, you have to be making something good. Like, really good. Let me just state this. The aesthetic isn't really abandoned, more so it's been overdone. And maybe that's worse than being forgotten. It's being remembered as stale. The scene aesthetic, aka the genre in the mid-2000s that is strongly correlated with Invader Zim, and also Hot Topic. Listen, don't get it twisted. They shouldn't be mistaken for emo. The scene genre is correlated with, say, nightcore, pop punk, MySpace pages, and of course, a lot of rainbows. In order to understand the scene genre, we need to get into some history. Each generation that has come has been met with a section known as counterculture. Following 2001, and after a very big event happened, America was plunged into an era of war. There was a bunch of paranoia at the time, and the way this translated to the kids at the time was an era of tension. The stakes after a prosperous 1990s had never been higher, so where else to escape but the music? In 2004, Green Day released the record American Idiot. The record tells the story of a generation coming of age during an era of great turmoil. A critique on the George W. Bush presidency. Its other themes include trying to understand what is going around you. It follows a protagonist, a lower middle class suburban American teen, raised on a diet of soda pop and Ritalin. There's so much going on, might as well rock on, right? I mention this album because I think it's critical in understanding the scene aesthetic. Yeah, there's all this tension, but why bother, right? Let's dress in this colorful clothing, dye your hair pink or blue. Let's watch some Invader Zim. Yeah, for some reason, they really attached themselves to Invader Zim. Okay, you may be wondering, why Invader Zim? Well, I think it really has to do with the character, Gur. He's incredibly random. Humor that is synonymous with the scene genre.
Cows are my friends. I don't like it.
He's neon green, and he bounces around doing zany stuff.
Going to eat that.
Invader Zim was like a really weird show. Something that really stood out to the scene kids who, at the time, were displayed as weird. Not only that, but Invader Zim also had other themes of nihilism, that an impending doom was always on the horizon. Its humor was dark in various aspects, but somehow throughout it all, Invader Zim is able to put on a happy face throughout all the dark subject matters.
Thanks to the bravery of this child, the world will never have to deal with the threat of lice ever again.
It's really suitable because the creator of the show, Johan Vasquez, had a series of comics that were about crazy people living in dysfunctional societies. Something scene kids thought they lived in, living in an era of terror. All this colorful doom brings us to the one and only Hot Topic. A clothing store that dominant with emos, scene kids, and random culture in general. Okay, so we're at Hot Topic right now, and look at this. They have some Gur action over there. Okay, kind of second guess what's right next to it. We have badass Garfield right next to it. That's badass. That's what I'm saying. Hot Topic is crazy. It retells to a generation that likes to dress alternatively. They sell a bunch of music-related t-shirts and apparel that traditional mall-based retailers don't sell. Yeah, where else are you gonna get those $20 Invader Zim Gur Pig pajama pants? Amazon? I mean, yeah, I guess so, but you won't get the true, authentic Hot Topic experience. As mentioned prior, Hot Topic was notable for having many shirts having to do with bands that were popular with scene culture. A popular band that of this aesthetic was that of Pierce the Veil. Listen, the song King for a Day, if you weren't bopping for this, you weren't sane. Of course you have the band Paramore. I mean, the lead singer, Hayley Williams, was like the embodiment of this culture. Listen, Paramore's new music is pretty good, but they're never going to top Riot. That's like an undisputed champion of scene kids everywhere. Of course, I can't talk about scene music without talking about the one and only Avril Lavigne. Okay, the song Complicated was pretty good, and as well Skater Boy. But I could kind of pinpoint when scene died. and that has to do with her music video Hello Kitty. I mean, it should have all the elements of Scene, right? It's colorful, it's wacky, but the music video is one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen. Overall, Scene music could be defined as this. The music at the time was very melodramatic, very whiny lyrics, and honestly it was all incredible. I love Scene music. Listen, someone can be having the worst day possible, but if they were to put on I Write Sins Not Tragedies on the radio, then I'd be willing to say their day would turn a 180. At the end of all of this, we do have to discuss how this translated onto the internet. This leads us to MySpace. So MySpace was kind of epic because it allowed you to customize whatever your webpage looked like. If you may notice, the constant here when it comes to these web pages are the colors black and pink, skulls, and whatever edgy quote they decided to put on their page. Kind of based, I'm not gonna lie. So unlike previous countercultures that came before, I would argue that scene culture was the very first generation to take over the internet. I mean, there's a reason why Onision or Dan and Phil got pretty big around this time. When you have a song titled I'm a Banana go viral, one of the greatest examples of how excessive random humor was in the late 2000s to early 2010s, I would argue the people behind this song's success would definitely have quite the identity behind the scenes. That's why MySpace came to prominence at the right time. Being able to decorate your own homepage and list your best friends was crucial in promoting this culture. You could call yourself XXX, MCR fan forever XXX, and people wouldn't make fun of you. In fact, you'd make a couple new friends. When scene kids were coming to prominence, this confused a lot of people. It's kind of crazy because I remember around this time, I was watching the news, and there was a segment about scene kids where Fox was like, isn't this kind of weird?
My parents were, deported, and I live here with someone who isn't really a relative of mine. And I get really depressed sometimes, but I just put in the Black Parade, and I'm like, I know there's something I relate to, and something that makes me want to keep on living.
When it came to scene kids coming to, well, the scene, there were fierce rejectors who disliked them immensely. The way they dressed, the way they looked.
The ridicule has even turned to rage against emo scene kids, with calls for violent assault in a national beatdown day and other efforts to target scene kids.
The downfall of the scene kid genre coincided with the times. In terms of its relativity towards American history, things were getting better. The United States was leaving Iraq. The Great Recession, which coincided with the height of the scene kid generation, was slowly dissipating. Eventually, what was the use of this counterculture if things were going to be alright? But the thing that killed the scene genre was the fact that these people who were in their teens going through this phase were getting older. Now entering their 20s, they looked introspectively and decided that it was time to grow up. By the mid-2010s, a more socially acceptable form of an aesthetic was that of the 2014 Tumblr aesthetic. After being ridiculed by the media and people alike, people dyed their hair back to normal and continued on. But something crazy happened. In the late 2010s, TikTok came to prominence. In the same realm, people who were also in their teens began to dress like they were straight from 2007. Not only that, but in terms of the music realm, which was crucial for scene culture, it was almost as if it didn't go away. Sure, My Chemical Romance may have retired in the year 2011, bands such as Panic! At the Disco continued, while other new bands such as 21 Pilots grew to prominence. In fact, in 2022, I would say the scene culture came back in a massive way. In Las Vegas, there was a massive concert titled When We Were Young, which brought back various old bands that many had thought had long been disbanded to celebrate a culture from long ago. The scene culture was abandoned. People did grow up and move on, but at the heart of it all, people didn't forget. And in this way, maybe scene culture will never die. Frutiger Metro. Frutiger Metro is the alternative to Frutiger Aero. Similar to Aero, it combines humanism and nature with glossy textures, bloom elements, and an essence of abstractness. One of the key differences here is that Aero is attuned to a lot of 3D designs, while Metro has a lot of flat designs. Metro's primary colors are green and blue, and the way it's used in advertising, let's just say it's iconic. This is the first iPod Shuffle ad from 2005. If you notice, this ad is really trying to appeal to a younger generation. If you look at a lot of Metro artwork, it revolves around a younger person. I mean, look at the original artwork for the Xbox 360 box. Even the Xbox 360 interface itself. These human silhouettes are a consistent theme when it comes to Frutiger Metro. With DJ mixers, headphones, dude, these kids are always dancing and hyped up, who can blame them? This glossiness and also blockiness could be seen also in TV shows, especially TV bumpers, such as the case with Cartoon Network. Here's a perfect example right here.
Up next, it's an all-new Adventure Time on Cartoon Network.
Oh, you want some more flatness? How about Skype? Yeah, remember Skype? It was a precursor to Discord. In terms of TV shows, I don't think there's any better example than that of The Amazing World of Gumball. Frutiger Metro, the TV show, basically. I watched The Amazing World of Gumball for a couple years, and I was always impressed how consistent it was with its humor. But not only that, its art style was fantastic. I know some people complain that it would be weird to see some 3D rendered characters mixed with cartoony characters, but I always thought that that's what made the show cool. Alongside Frutiger Metro comes various subgenres. For example, there's the genre Vector Garden, or also known as Floral Metro. Basically a bunch of floral patterns in the Frutiger Metro style, with pink being the dominant color. This was most notable in the show Monster High. Another subgenre would be that of grungy metro. Associated with the scene genre, it was basically splatters of Frutiger Metro with Victor patterns and a big use of the color black and pink. Famous examples of this when it comes to video games would be The World Ends With You, the Persona series, and of course Patapon. Comment below if you remember Patapon because it was awesome. Frutiger Metro is interesting. Unlike Frutiger Aero, it doesn't hype up a future that is unattainable. Frutiger Metro was unattainable since the beginning. You could only see it in graphic art. Often we would see depictions of teens partying, having the greatest time of their lives. Metro's attempt was to self-insert yourself. That could be you with the headphones listening to the iPod Shuffle, or that could be the avatar that you use for Xbox Live. You could be your own DJ or supermodel in a world that, although flat, isn't lacking of substance. There are constant debates about establishing what is Frutiger Metro. It's difficult to truly confine it, but that's what I think is the beauty of the entire thing. Frutiger Metro went out around the same time as Frutiger Aero. The aesthetic phased out. That was until recently. With the uprise of Frutiger Aero, there has also been an uptick of Frutiger Metro. People have even been making edits of themselves trying to replicate Frutiger Metro, and they're super impressive. In fact, a couple months ago, Pink Panthers, a famous artist who has a lot of songs that I would label as Frutiger Metrocore, released a music video that was basically like a love letter to the entire genre. As long as there's people around who grew with Frutiger Metro, it truly will never die. Subscribe, see ya.